Legal chaos.
Legal chaos.
Legal chaos.
Legal chaos.
Legal
Chaos. Legal
Chaos.
chaos.
It's legal chaos.
All right. Here we are back, episode 4 of Legal Chaos, our recently weekly podcast about the chaotic world of the legal world and public opinion and recent cases and our experiences and knowledge, back with my law partner, Tony, who's here not only today, but always. I don't think he leaves the office. He's here 24/7. Love you for that, Tony. Thank you.
I'm psyched.
I
I
know.
am so psyched to be here today. I don't know what it is, but I've been psyched all day, man.
Well, I got Brandon running everything again. We appreciate Brandon being here.
What's up, everybody?
We had Craft Catering come in. They brought pizza, which was great, fantastic.
Yeah.
I had most of it. I feel like I could take a nap.
I think you did take a nap.
I did close my eyes for a minute, but we started putting this thing together, and we realized that some of these episodes that we've been doing kind of have a theme to them. And so when I was thinking about what we're going to be doing this week, one of the themes that popped into my mind was responsibility. And really what it comes down to, and when you think about it, everything in the legal world comes down to responsibility, whether it's personal responsibility, corporate responsibility, somebody's committed a crime, are they responsible? Somebody's getting sued, who's responsible for the injuries, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of what we do is try to hold somebody accountable and responsible, and that's why we have so many lawsuits and we see these headlines as to who can we sue. Somebody's been wronged, something happened.
Yeah.
And we're lucky we're in a society that way we live in. When something happens, then somebody's injured or somebody's been wrong, then there's accountability and responsibility.
Yeah. And I started to think about different cases that I've been exposed to over the last week or so, or things that have been come to my attention, which I wanted to talk about. And then all of a sudden today, before we're ready to pop on here, one of the things that's always been interesting for me and you and for a lot of people is the sports world and how the legal world and the sports world come together. And one case that we've been following a little bit, before I get into kind of our other responsibility, although this has responsibility to it, is this NBA, this gambling scandal with the FBI. And today, Tony, Damon Jones, expected to plead guilty for selling injury information to bettors. So he's going to go into federal court and he's going to enter a plea of guilty. He's like one of 30 people that have been caught up in this, and he's really the first high-profile guy that's actually going to go into court and take responsibility.
Yeah.
You excited about that?
I'm not surprised, and we do a lot of federal work, right?
Yeah.
When the federal government, especially the way that this case got presented,
Yeah.
It made the news. What was and I asked this before, what was the headline?
Brandon, do you remember? Nothing but net.
Nothing but bet.
Nothing but bet.
Yeah.
I think people don't realize, and we talked about federal cases being proactive versus state cases being reactive.
Yeah.
And part of that with state cases, if somebody goes in and robs a liquor store, it's reactive. Law enforcement react, and they go to the scene, and they take evidence, and then they get a suspect, and then somebody's charged. Well, federal cases are proactive, and they allow the conduct to happen. They allow it to happen once, twice, 3 times, and then these agents go to the AUSA and say, I've got a case, There you go. And what does the AUSA say? Not so fast. Go give me some more. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
By the time this case makes the media, it's already been presented to a grand jury. There is an abundance of charges. There is an abundance of evidence. A lot of times for defense lawyers on these types of cases, it's just damage control. So I'm surprised it's taken this long. I'm not surprised that Damon, again, nobody wants to say how his lawyers conduct business, but I'm not surprised that he'll proffer, and you can touch upon that.
Yeah.
And Damon's already talked about his involvement and Terry's involvement and Chauncey's involvement. And everybody else's involvement, because the first in line gets the best deal. So if Damon is the first one to plea, he's probably getting a better deal than number 2, 3, and 4 on that list. So not surprised, and surprised it's taken this long to get a plea, quite frankly.
Well, you said something there about first one in, and when the FBI gets involved and they knock at your door, it's not because, hey, we're the FBI and we're here to help.
Yeah.
They've got the goods on you. And, we do a lot of federal work. And one of the things that I think we both enjoy about doing federal work is it's so challenging because, of course, whenever you go against the government, whether it's the state government, even a municipal court, when they've got a municipal prosecutor, they still have more resources. They got detectives, and they've got different chemists, and they've got lab people.
Yeah.
And then you keep going. In the state level, there's even more resources. And then when you get to the federal level, it's overwhelming. And they have unlimited resources. So for us, I think it's really attractive for us to get involved in those cases because they are so challenging.
Yeah.
And when you can get good results in those cases, it makes you feel even better. But you mentioned, why did it take Damon Jones? Why so quick, or why not quicker? And the reality of it is that, and I don't know what he did, but the interesting thing about how the feds work is they use cooperators more than any other state, local prosecutors. The federal prosecutors, they use cooperating agreements. They use cooperators to come in and give them information.
Yeah.
And they do something that's called a proffer, Proffer, which you sit down and some of the assistant U.S. attorneys will say, "Oh, you're going to be a queen for the day," which is kind of their joke in saying you can sit down and you can talk with us and we won't use it against you, can only help you.
Yeah.
But you got to be complete and you got to be truthful. And so maybe Damon Jones, if he's going to be the first in, it may very well be an alert to others. Yeah. Hey, if you're not on board yet, you better be. And and maybe Damon Jones has gone in there, and maybe he said, you know what, I'm going to fall on the sword. I'm going to take responsibility for my actions, and I'm done, and I'm going to go take my medicine. Or it could be that he's gone in and he's cooperated and he's given information, but potentially not just on others in the case.
Yeah.
But he may have been talking about other things because the more you give,
the more credit you get.
Yeah.
Right? And what you're referring to, and I think there's two ways that a lot of these federal cases get worked out. If there's a proffer agreement under 5K1, and we talked about this before, the sentencing guidelines, the U.S. government's created this elaborate, and I think a lawyer and an engineer and a mathematician got together and they created this thing because the numbers don't make sense to me at all. So there's criminal history, there's a level on offense, and you look at this book that's got about 800 pages and you see where your client falls in. But there's also parameters of providing discounts. And a discount is a motion that the government files. If you provide enough information, then the government will advocate to the court that you should get a 10% discount, or you get a 20% discount, or you went above and beyond, get a 30% discount reduction on the level of offense and the amount of time, whether it's a probation case or whether it's a prison case. Otherwise you're doing kind of a 11C1C, and there's an agreement up front. I don't see anything that shows that there's an agreement. But if there's a plea and then there's a PSR process, which means that he's probably not going to be sentenced for another 90 plus days, what I suspect is in the next 30 to 45 days is you're going to see the domino effect of others going into federal court, because if they know they have information on Damon Jones is culpable, but he's also going to say, this is what I did, and the government wants to confirm the information they already have.
Yeah.
Of the other co-defendants, and that's just going to strengthen their case. And when they do that, they go to their defense lawyers and say, hey, look, we have information, hint, hint. We've talked to this individual. He's confirmed what culpability, what acts of your clients have committed. They're looking at conspiracy, which basically is two or more individuals that agree to commit some sort of criminal enterprise. So if Damon was part of an overt act, or if he was part of a co-conspirator, all he has to say is, yeah, this was my part of I didn't know what that guy did over there, but this was part of my act that helped this enterprise go. And I believe that if you go talk to someone else, if you go talk to Nick, he may know the other piece, but we all kind of spoke to this wheel of this conspiracy that we're all in. So he may have provided 5% of information that led them to confirm what they have on the other individuals, or he may have provided 30% and blown this thing up. If I was his lawyer in that case and I initially get involved and I'm reaching out to the AUSA and I'd say, hey, look, what do you have on my client? Show me some information. And if it looks bad, then I'm going to try to work this thing out as quick as I can, because at the end of the day, somebody's going to fall in a conspiracy. And if you're at the end of the line and your co-conspirators have already proffered, have already pled, have already worked out a deal, and they're pointing at you and you go to trial, then all 6 of them or 7 of them are going to show up going, that's the guy, that's the guy. So, I'm not surprised, and I think a lot of the domino pieces are going to be falling here the next 30 to 45 days. And you're right. I think this could open up, and the federal government is always interested, and we've been a part of a lot of these cases. And when you're doing these proffers, is, hey, what's your culpability on this case? And by the way, do you know any other enterprises that are doing this? Any other pockets of a conspiracy that are involved in fraudulent and gambling, or setting up these games to be false. So it's going to be interesting how the domino pieces fall on this. But no, I'm only surprised at how long it took.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something. The other side of that is this. Tony, when a lot of times the people that have never been involved in the criminal justice system think that it works like everything else, right? You say, hey, by the way, I need to go buy my kid a car.
Yeah.
And I found this car. I mean, what are you going to do with the guy when you're trying to buy the car? He's going to say, hey, this is what I'm going to give you. This is what it's going to take to get the car. This is the offer.
Yeah.
What are you doing? You're negotiating with them, aren't you?
Try to.
And so most people that we deal with, they say, they've got in their mind, they'll say, oh, the first offer, we'll get better offers.
Yeah.
We'll keep going down the road. We're going to get better offers. This is not a good offer. Well, maybe, but when your world has been designed to think that way, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to negotiate this, we're going to go back and forth. Sometimes in the real world, that's how it works.
Sure.
But in this system, a lot of times, it's, no, look, here's what's going to happen. You've got an opportunity. You're the first guy we're going to talk to. Do you want to talk with us? And if you say no, they'll say, okay, we're going to the next guy.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, your ability to negotiate or talk is gone. And what our clients sometimes, when we have to counsel them on this, is that, going and running up to the edge of trial because you think the prosecutor or the assistant U.S. attorney is going to get nervous and scared. They don't want to go to trial. They're going to give me a better deal. No. In this situation, when you've got 10s, 20, 30 co-defendants, it is going to be beneficial for that first guy
Right.
to come in and kind of break the ice. And so you're right. It could be that it could have come quicker. But the interesting thing, I think, is why it came and the difference that negotiations and making offers and striking deals is a lot of times in a criminal justice, especially in a federal system. So I think you're right. I think it's going to be interesting that this has happened, and I'm fascinated by this case. I can't wait. I can't wait to see what happens next.
That seems like a good tool for the prosecutors too. They can get somebody in there and be like, well, if you don't snitch, somebody else is going to snitch.
Well, Brandon, and you're right. And the other thing is, what do you think when the news breaks, Damon Jones is going to go in and plead guilty tomorrow, and there's a bunch of other co-defendants and their lawyers saying, "What? Wait, what? What happened?
Yeah.
What's going on there?"
Right.
And the first call they're going to make is to that U.S. attorney, and he's going to say,
told
get
you
in
that.
line.
If you're the second, third, fourth, or sixth guy that's trying to get your meal, the information at some point becomes stale, and the value of what you provide on a lot of these cases that have been, again, investigated for months.
Yeah.
They know a lot of the information.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't indict on information that they believe is speculation. So I think the government had a pretty good idea, and part of it is that kind of electronic cloud footprint that is left, that it really is hard these days to get away with a lot of the gambling stuff, especially if you look at the metrics. So I think I'm also very interested in following that, but I'm even more interested in what's going on with Uber these days.
Okay. All right. So
First of all, regardless of how litigation works, I think me personally, I love traveling. I love using Uber. I think it's a great concept. So, I'm here to defend the Uber Corporation.
Okay. Well, you're gonna have to put on.
I'm gonna defend the Uber Corporation as the Lady Justice is losing her scales.
Well, so the theme here is responsibility, and the question is responsibility disappearing? Because we know that responsibility is being litigated, and what you're talking about is Uber, and everybody knows Uber. You got the app, and you got a driver, and they take you here to there. And Uber recently got hit with a multi-million-dollar verdict, and they are being brought into court. They're facing now a second, what's called a driver sexual assault trial. And the idea here, Tony, is, Uber is being held responsible for the acts of their drivers.
Yeah. And
obviously because Uber's got the deep pockets. And so what do you think about that?
It's interesting, and as I'm looking through this, it kind of reminds me of when I was in law school and we started talking about respondeat superior, vicarious liability. So in general, and there's two major issues here.
Well, why are you bringing words up that I don't know?
Well, because I'm trying to defend Uber.
I mean, I don't do that work.
Vicarious liability
I don't even know how to
means
spell
that as employers, we are not responsible for the acts of our employees, specifically if they commit criminal offenses like assault, sexual assault, rape, things of that nature. We didn't. Those are intentional acts that we didn't train our employees, and they're not in the scope of what the scope of their employment is.
Right.
And so before we get to liability, and there's two ways to look at this, and we'll kind of break down, and I know you've got a position on this, But before we get to whether there's a apparent authority, whether there's an agency relationship between the driver and the passenger and the person that was harmed in Uber, you have to analyze whether the individuals who sign up and use the app to connect them with potential passengers, are they considered independent contractors? Are they considered employees? So before you do an analysis of a parent-agency relationship as to whether they're held vicariously liable of their employees, I would argue, and I've always seen this, because I think if you want to change the dynamics of this, and again, I disagree with how that was found.
You mean the decision?
The decision, notwithstanding the act itself. Okay, I think it's going to send a ripple effect to everything, all the commerce that we have going, and we'll talk about that and what happened. When COVID hit, we have Uber Eats, DoorDash, all the
gig economy.
All the gig economy, right?
Yeah.
And it's a $1 billion economy, and people strive for it, and they use it, they rely upon it, they rely for income, and there's now no taxes on tip. And we just saw, a DoorDash driver deliver food to Trump. It's a big thing. Now, if we want to consider drivers for Uber employees, that's going to change the dynamics of things. So I would submit that they've always been independent contractors. What an independent contractor means is that they work independently from Uber. So all the money that they generate, they're going to have to pay taxes on it. They're going to have insurance on their vehicle, and they're responsible for their own actions. What Uber does is provides a platform that connects the user and the user end and the driver. So I want an Uber, I go to the app, Uber says, hey, let me find a car that works closely for us. We don't hire them. They control their own hours. They have their own vehicle. They have their own insurance for the vehicle. They live in their own home. In fact, there's no brick and mortar. Uber doesn't have a brick and mortar store, a parking lot in every city that has Uber service. People work out of their garages. So I don't understand how we're going to treat it that way, because it's going to be problematic. If people enjoy the service of Uber, if people enjoy the service of DoorDash, if people enjoy the other services, and we're going to start treating them as employees, then guess what? What's going to happen now is labor laws, labor relation laws is what we see it's going on with Amazon and their employees. And they're gonna change the dynamic. It's gonna increase the cost, and ultimately, that service industry it may have to go away. I mean, at some point, if the cost is too high, then that may not be there. So I would suggest, before you even get to apparent authority and whether they're vicariously liable because they're providing their employees with a method to have control over their driver, and that's what it is. So another example of apparent authority is a hotel worker having access to a key to a room, and they go in there and cause harm to somebody. Well, the hotel can say, well, that's vicarious liability. I'm not responsible because that was an intentional act. But
so you think the hotel employee is different or the same?
It's the same. It's the same. Okay. So in that situation, they're employees, so apparent authority applies, and the hotel would be responsible for their act. Mm-hmm. In this case, before you even get to apparent authority, we would say you can't even analyze that relationship because they're not employees in the first place. They're independent contractors. So the argument ends there.
Well,
there.
I kind of hope you're right, because if I'm right, then we got real problems.
All right, so I have the devil's advocate to this, because I was an Uber driver back after the pandemic as well, and I know people who were unable to become Uber drivers because they couldn't pass the background inspection. The fact that they're giving these sort of, I don't know if they're overly rigorous, but it's a process to get hired. Isn't that sort of them implicitly saying that that's their duty to make sure that they're hiring safe individuals?
Well, so Brandon,
That's a good point.
Well, Brandon, when I and I'm glad you brought that up, because when I look at, and I was just pulling Google up here, what Uber does, and I don't know if this is how it was when you were there, but Uber provides drivers, okay, and this is what they say, with a flexible, independent contracting platform. There's Tony with
Thank you.
Okay, and we can call it whatever we want. It's like you going somewhere and it says we are not responsible for lost or stolen items. Like all of a sudden anybody where you park is not responsible, even if their employees are stealing from you or if damage is done. I don't know how you can, or by the way, when you go to an amusement park, we're not responsible if you break your neck. On the roller coaster, there's a lot of different examples where people say something, but they necessarily aren't. It doesn't get them out of the legal responsibility. But what Uber does, and they say, hey, you're right, we're going to make you independent. You can drive when you want to drive. But did you know Uber maintains insurance on behalf of drivers to protect them, covering injuries and accidents, uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage, and contingent collision comprehensive coverage. They provide, obviously, instant pay, pro rewards, vehicle options through their vehicle marketplace. Drivers can access rentals, including insurance, maintenance, and limited mileage. They provide in-app safety issues for the emergency buttons for their drivers. We're here to help you. And so they do some of these things that I would argue they can call them independent, but a federal jury decided that they aren't.
They got it wrong.
They may have gotten it wrong, but these are the issues that they're grappling with, and the idea is, if and Brandon says it, hey, we have background check.
That's safety protocol.
Okay,
That's a minimum.
sure, okay, or you make sure you have a good driving record and things like that. Because if I'm right, and there are, according to what I've seen, about 300 cases that are queued up. So you've got.
Do you honestly think that they're employees?
Well, I think that you can make that argument, and I think that that argument's been made, and I think that that argument has won. And the reason why you don't want that, you don't want me to be successful, is because of the impact that that decision, not only that decision is going to make on everybody's pocketbook. Because now, if that continues, some of these platforms are going to go out of business. People are going to lose jobs. They're going to, or the cost for those services are going to be covered by who? By the people that are using
Sure.
it. The costs are going to go up. And so, when we've got 300 cases, there's going to be potentially massive settlements depending on this next case. And this issue can redefine the gig economy as we know it. And so this can be a big, big issue. And you asked me, do I believe that they are employees to the point that the parent company should be held responsible?
Under a parent authority, right?
Yeah. I'd say yeah, sometimes. Yeah, I think so. I think that they should. But that's
how do you argue? So if I'm, and it seems to me, and again, I haven't seen the evidence and the closing arguments on it, but if I'm on a jury, or if I'm a lawyer and I'm presenting this to a jury, and based upon the conclusion of the case, they issued a ruling saying that they believe that the drivers are employees. They must have been confused about something.
maybe.
Because if if we think about traditional employees, right? So just like we have here, the expectation is we have employees. We expect you to come into work. We tell you when to come into work. We pay you. There's wages. There's FICA taxes, right? You follow, again, maybe the handbook is a little bit different, but you are getting paid by us.
Okay.
And we're telling you when to work. Now, with an Uber driver, Uber doesn't pay them.
Do they have a Uber sticker on their car? Or
Uber, they're using Uber as a platform,
Okay.
as an independent contractor.
Let me ask you a question before you move forward. As an attorney, you got a law firm and you've got employees, right?
Yeah.
If they do something wrong, are you and this law firm responsible?
If they work for me,
Yes.
I mean, it depends, but yeah, because if they're employees.
Okay. What if you got a guy here who's of counsel,
Yeah.
and when a person comes to visit them in your office and they walk in and they look at the sign on the door and it says Gounaris Abboud, and they walk into that guy that's sitting there,
Yeah.
do they know that he's not an employee?
If they're meeting in the office, then absolutely
So if they're meeting in an Uber car,
different.
different. Okay. I love your argument.
Look,
I love it.
Here's the point.
Yeah.
The vehicle belongs to the owner of the vehicle who parks it in his house.
Okay. Right.
Go to every city and try to Google where's the Uber Corporation in Dayton, Ohio? Where's the Uber Corporation in Columbus, Ohio? Let me go file a complaint. There isn't any.
So, do you believe
There isn't any.
Do you believe then, and neither of us, I know, don't know the specifics of this, but you know, when you go to trial and you've got 12 people making a decision, is it your belief that most likely the jurors felt some sort of they didn't look at the law, but they got to the emotion of what happened to the
course.
victim? Is that what you think it is?
Well, and we talked about the scales of justice.
Sure.
In a civil case, the scales are ever so slightly 51%. Right?
Yeah.
It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. So, part of that is there may have been some pretty good arguments of how Uber, and I think you mentioned some things like they use the app, they get a check by Uber gives them some regulations. Brandon brought it up, like background checks. So
helps them with insurance.
Part of that is there's some control, and I think you can make that argument if you're a plaintiff's lawyer saying Uber has enough control over the regulation of that driver that although they're independent, but really they're not independent. So you can't hide behind the mask of that by saying they're not employees because we're not paying them with the W-2. We're sending them a check, and then we're telling them to go ahead and pay your taxes. So I could understand, if you're a good plaintiff's lawyer is going to make that argument, and a good defense lawyer, which I believe I am, I would say absolutely not. Traditionally, this is what the definition of an employee is.
You know, Tony, it's not the first time that, and again, neither of us know the specifics as to how that jury came to that conclusion, but it wouldn't be the first time that a jury has what we would say made bad law, right? Where their decisions, and we've talked about it on this podcast, create a case law, and maybe this case goes and gets appealed, and maybe there's some other things. But it's when we're sitting here talking, it reminded me about something from my past, which was you and I both, when we first started, we did some civil work.
Yeah.
And when I got out of law school, I worked for a law firm that did civil litigation. And at the time, when you would do it would be an automobile accident, someone would get hurt, and you would sue the person that hurt you. Meaning, if you hit me in an automobile, I would sue you, and in turn, my lawyer would ask for your insurance information.
Sure.
And you'd say, well, here, I've got State Farm insurance. remember, some of those lawyers would also say, well, wait a minute, Abboud, this guy's getting state minimum. He's got like $15,000 in cover. That's not going to cut it. I wonder if Abboud's got a house. And does Abboud have homeowners insurance? Give me your homeowners insurance policy. Does he have an umbrella policy? And you remember for a period of time that these insurance companies, that plaintiffs' lawyers were going and being able to stack different insurance claims. And they would be able to cover under the automobile and then maybe under an exception and a homeowner's.
I remember that.
And they could get to big pockets of money. And how did that end?
It got overturned.
And
they stopped it.
And litigation, right?
Yeah.
And then the case law changed.
Yeah.
And someone said, we need to change this. And they got judges and they changed it. And so maybe, we might see something like that too. We may see decisions that are going to impact, and again, we don't know, but maybe this court and this jury made a decision. It's going to be interesting to see.
It's going to get appealed.
It's going to be appealed, and they've got all these cases, and it's strange because I think I'm taking this side, but I hope I'm wrong. Because I do truly believe, and when we talk about responsibility, one of the things we talk about is personal responsibility. We got to take responsibility for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the law is based on many times. And so is it responsible for the person who's committed the offense to be responsible for their actions and not, you're right, somebody in a different state that just, I'm putting the patch on the side of the car and I'm driving a car for them.
Sure.
Unless, they knew that Brandon was a horrible driver and they let him drive anyway.
Sure.
But you're right. I hope I'm wrong because it can truly impact these things negatively.
Yeah. I mean, the collateral effects of this court, and again, the case was out of Arizona. How juries feel about that, I don't know. Whether it's going to be a trickle effect, who knows? But it's certainly a decision that could change the landscape of a lot of these third-party services, and DoorDash could be next. Somebody. A lot of times, and we see this on the news, and we love DoorDash, but sometimes when people don't properly tip. We've seen videos where, the drivers get upset.
Yeah.
Right? They'll knock back on the door and there's a confrontation. Now,
what about Amazon?
Amazon's kind of a different story.
Well, but Amazon drivers.
Amazon drivers are considered employees.
Even though they might be driving their own car?
Well, a majority of them are considered employees, but what Amazon did is they're using these other companies,
right,
subcontractors to deliver, but then they have to follow the Amazon protocol. Amazon is a different beast because right now a lot of their in-person laborers, they're considered employees because they work in their distribution department, but they're having some fair labor law issues. A lot of it, kind of like what Walmart did years ago, and they were sued. But as far as the drivers, you're right. I mean, those are independent contractors.
Guy pulls up at my house and he's driving a Chevy Trailblazer or a Ford Focus, and the only thing that I recognize is that little vest.
Oh yeah. Years ago, I was terrified. I'd see it on my Ring camera, and like somebody's pulling up, and they got a box coming in my house, and I'm like, wait a minute, what's happening here? I'm like, okay, this is it. It's happening.
Yeah.
But it was an Amazon delivery driver, and they're independent contractors. Mm-hmm. So all these services, and they're great services because it's boosting up commerce, right? It's putting product to people quicker.
Yeah.
And it's given opportunities to people that may have not had opportunities before, right? Mm-hmm. And we live in kind of a capitalist society, and I think trying to regulate it and trying to have government say, no, we're not going to do it this way. The way you're doing it, the fact that you're wearing an Uber hat and you got the sticker on your car, you work for Uber. Now Uber has to put an office in every major city and where people have to go, and they have to fill out their W-4, and they have to be employees, and they get a W-2, and they get a paycheck, and we have to make sure they get a lunch break, and they can't drive more than 50. This is the regulation that I don't think a lot of people are looking for. So for that decision to go that way,
Yeah.
and there to be a jury to decide that they're considered employees and they're responsible vicariously under a parent authority, could be a dangerous feat in to every service that we love. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people that work for them, a lot of people, especially now with this law saying you can't tax on tip, dude, I mean, they're going to be expected to be employees. We're going to lose Uber drivers. We're going to lose DoorDash delivery drivers, Uber Eats, and the other cart. I mean, how many services are out there that provide a service?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think that's why Waymo is getting more and more popular. Just take out the human in general. Mm-hmm. I know in Austin it seems to be taking over, where there's nobody behind the wheel. So then
You talking about the little taxis that take you around?
yeah, but they deliver food, and there's also robots on the street that will.
I
just
think we've
deliver
got
you
something
food.
here. I think we've got something in Dayton like that.
Oh, do we?
well, I know at Miami University, I've seen like dropping off my kid, and I see these little R2D2 robots delivering food. Which I mean, there's a
Waiting at the crosswalk.
waiting at the crosswalk. I mean, there is an entourage of these bots, and then when they're not working, I think I drove by one area and they're all kind of like lined up together. It's an incredible feat, but we don't want to get to that, do we?
Yeah. I want to have food
Is
quicker.
well,
I do.
not only that, but we're taking the human element out of it. This
Well,
is ridiculous.
Let me tell you something.
Come on.
Well, let me tell you, you don't know it yet, but I'm looking into getting us a White Castle vending machine here at the office. I saw that they've got these great White Castle vending machines. They've got them in airports, and you press the button and they come piping hot. I'd love to have that here at the yeah. And I don't even want to pay for them. We'll just
Okay.
push the button and we'll have White Castles whenever.
Well, okay.
So the little robots don't bother me at all.
The little robots don't bother you.
And it seems like it solves this problem unless they start assaulting people.
Well, yeah, that's that old Will Smith movie,
iRobot.
iRobot, which I like that movie. No, but you talked about that, and this is I don't even want to go down this road, but all the trucking that's going to be done by driverless trucks, but
Gig economy, my friend. It's
Gig.
here. It's happening, and it's going to cause more chaos, depending on where you fall on it. It's the hypotheticals of employees, non-employee. But what about AI and copyright? I mean,
Yeah.
this thing is incredible. It's going quicker than we can understand it, and the way technology is, it's going quicker than the law can interpret it, and what's fair and not fair. But what's your take on this gig economy platform? We're talking about responsibility. We're talking about AI and copyright, and it really has to go a lot of it with patent law. But what's your take on this,
Yeah.
Nick?
well, let me ask Brandon first. Do you use ChatGPT today or one of those today?
I actually use DeepSeek, which apparently is like a Chinese government psyop or something.
That's
Great. Thanks a lot, Brandon.
That's great.
Now we're all going to be on the watch list.
Did you use ChatGPT today?
I've used ChatGPT today.
Okay.
I've asked Chat to kind of tell me how good I am, and it responds and says, "You're a great person." I love how it gasses me up all day
getting
long. And I
gassed
said, "Hey, I need some compliments. Can you look at my website?" And it says, "The website's terrific, and you're an awesome lawyer." So
Well-
thanks to Chat.
So, we talked about the theme responsibility, and we talked about personal responsibility. We had Uber driver who's not only personally responsible, but so is the company.
Yeah.
This is responsibility as it relates to copyright. And the issue here, Tony,
Yeah.
you've got AI and you got to teach AI. AI's got to be taught. And so there are some cases that are out there. Bart's v. Anthropic, Kadri v. Meta, New York Times v. OpenAI. And the gist of these is that the AI companies are utilizing a lot of times works, writings, articles, books that have been created, creators, authors, journalists.
Yeah.
And they get pumped into these AI learning. They teach AI how to learn. And ultimately what we've seen is, and this is pretty amazing, in the Bart's v. Anthropic case, authors sued Anthropic, and they said the books that they wrote were copied. And you used it to train AI. And the court said, hey, wait a minute. You can train AI.
Yeah.
You can use it. That's what's called fair use. I'm going to ask you, you know these fancy terms better than I do. But fair use, they said, well, but using pirated books is not fair use. This case settled for $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
So what's fair use, and what does that mean?
Just it means that if you're using it in a way to gain knowledge, but not reproduce the same thing that the author is. So you can use it as a parody if you want to quote from it. You want to quote a sentence,
But you can't use the whole thing.
but you can't use it and pawn it off as your own work.
Yeah.
Now, what AI is doing, it's training. I mean, this kind of reminds me of, and I love the Matrix trilogy.
Yeah.
And I think it was the first Matrix when, Keanu Reeves is learning and the other guy's putting all these different software, and he gets up, he's like, I just learned Kung Fu.
Right, I remember that. Yeah, I remember
I've just
that.
learned Kung Fu, feed me more. And the guy's like feeding him. He's learning it. It's fair use because he's learning the concept of that, and that's what AI is doing.
Well, wait a minute. What if that taught him a guy that had certain moves that costs, you have to pay him, and AI took it?
That's illegal. That's not fair
Okay,
use.
that's not fair use.
pirated information.
All right. Okay.
So the concept of AI, it's supposed to have the knowledge to be able to answer complex situations or even simple situations. But what these authors are saying is that you didn't have our permission to use these information because it was not public. These are pirated information. AI is going to be around, and so long as the information is for fair use and it's a patent law type of response, copyrighted information, but so long as you're using it and not to try to reproduce the same information, then that's fine. So, in these other cases, we've got New York Times versus Open, where New York Times sued AI and Microsoft, claiming AI trained New York articles, replicated summarized articles, thereby allowing users to bypass paywalls.
So that's different. So that took the Anthropic case.
Yes.
And it's now saying what? That you guys, I'm writing these books. I want to make money. I'm writing articles. I got a paywall. Now all of a sudden, OpenAI is going to give you my stuff for free, right?
Sure.
What do you think of that? You think that's right?
Absolutely not. I think, you're trying, in order to protect the integrity of the artist's work, part of it is they need to protect the creativity. AI is not very creative because it's using other people's work to provide an answer, but it's taken so much information and it's doing a research project for you in about 30 seconds that would take you 6 hours to do.
Yeah.
And it's providing you enough information in order to explain that in that way. But the information still has to be protected. If certain articles in the New York Times are pay articles, then those aren't information that AI can use in order to learn and antiquate that on behalf of whoever the user is. So there's got to be a balance of that. There's got to be some sort of balance, and I think this thing is going to evolve. We got issues with music as well. I saw something recently. I think, Brandon, you sent that to me, where AI is being used to create a voice that's similar to an artist.
Yeah, Murphy Campbell is her name.
And creating music.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but it actually is going a step further, because not only are they using her music to train this AI, but then they have since gone after her for her actual music for copyright claims on the internet, which is like a whole other level of sort of, sadistic.
And she's lost the rights for that. They're able to get the rights of the AI. And again, that's a whole separate issue. But going back to what's transformative. Transformative in AI cases means the training module, and transformative because it doesn't reproduce books directly. It's learning pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as the new purpose is to generate new content based on patterns. Again, these are the technology. It's only going to get better. So I think as long as we protect the integrity and use not only what we've learned in Anthropic, but the New York Times case, if things are not pirated and they're used for transformative reasons, I think it's here to stay.
What people don't, and I think this New York Times case it's not over yet. It's still active. It's in discovery mode. And one thing we didn't talk about in the Uber case is in civil cases. Tony, in civil cases, the court has a little bit more discretion in certain claims moving forward if that legal standard isn't there. Like they can, in civil cases, they have something that's called summary judgment. And, I don't know, it'd be something that would be interesting to look into on, why didn't that legal issue that you're talking about with the ChatGPT about, employee, whether or not that was ripe for that civil jury in the Uber case.
Yeah.
There's no summary judgment, but this New York Times article, or this New York Times case, is also tied in with what's called MDL, multi-district litigation, which is you can go into class action type stuff, and the issue the issue here can be so dramatic. As much as we were talking about the Uber case, this one, if New York Times wins, then AI companies are going to have to pay for these content licenses. Where's that get passed on to? Everybody else,
Sure.
right? If OpenAI wins, I think that's like an even bigger impact on creators.
Why? I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, wait a minute. What if I'm Michael?
I don't think so.
What if I'm Michael Crichton, or I don't know if I think he's not alive anymore. But if I'm an author, and now my material, now I just get on and I say, let me see that latest book, let me read it. Let me have that New York Times article that just came out. I see it's behind a paywall. Give me that New York Times article.
Well, if you're going, look, first of all, that's a different issue. So if somebody writes a book,
Mm-hmm.
no publisher is going to put a free copy on the internet. Nobody.
We'll see.
Unless if I buy that book and I scan every image and I put it for distribution, then I've committed a crime. Then I'm held responsible for that. So the issue is pirated material, illegal material, going back to the Napster days when people used to download music for free, right?
Yeah.
So, ultimately, I don't think that's going to be an issue. The authors are still going to create content. They're still going to create art. They're still going to write books because AI is not writing books. It's all transformative. It's learning how to generate new content. Now, I bet you can go on ChatGPT, go to an AI platform, and submit 3 different authors. AI most likely haven't read the books, but they've read what people have said about the books and read summaries of their books. And you could ask AI to write you, a 30-page book based upon these authors, how they're toned, what the type of stories they write. But it's not going to be the same. It's new content that's based on summaries. That's what it is. I think we're making this a bigger issue than what it needs to be.
I disagree. I think I think it can be a very big issue. I think AI gets this. They're going to steamroll it. I think this case could very well decide. Whether the book or the material is going to be protected or not. I think that this is going to be a really interesting case. What I do, however, my confidence is that the way that we have treated copyrighted material in the past is going to protect these folks. That's my belief in the legal system because of the little that I know on copyright and patent is that that these laws are very, very strong. And so if the authors and if the journalists and all the people that are creating, the content creators, so to speak, I think that the law should be on their side.
The New York Times case is really focused on competition because, again, what the AI material does is creating summaries because it doesn't have access to the full article. And so why would people, at the end of the day when you're reading, it's like, get me to the cliff notes of it. I don't want to read the whole darn article. Tell me the summary.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's competition where New York's like, wait a minute, we're losing users because with AI, they're just reading the summaries.
Yeah.
That's what that case is about. It's about money at the end of the day. So I'm more intrigued, and I haven't done a whole lot about this. And going back to Brandon, what the video that you sent me, and I looked at it, the AI and using it, how it's used in the music industry. And to me, the way I look at that is, anybody can get a soundboard. You can go on, the internet these days. There's websites where anybody can, pretend that they're music producers and put a beat together. And it's not very artistic because the computer's doing it for you. But if you're mimicking an artist, right? If you're mimicking an artist that has a unique voice, it really comes down to their name, image, and likeness. So if I'm using, Drake, for example, and I said, hey, learn Drake's voice. And then I'm going to create a beat, and then I'm going to put some lyrics behind it, and then I'm going to make music, and then I'm going to copyright it.
Yeah.
Well, just because you created it, you created sound that's based upon Drake. Well, that's his name, image, and likeness because people are going to listen to it thinking that it sounds like him.
Yeah.
So I think that to me is more interesting than the AI and the chat and the learn and the transformative because I think a lot of these artists are going to say, you're copying my style.
I think
so that's
I don't disagree with you. I think that is a more interesting topic. I do believe also that all of these are going to be potentially impacting the commerce, right?
Sure.
We're going to AI for the easy way. Like, wait a minute, tell me the latest about, Tony Abboud's big murder case. Well, I'm not going to the newspaper. I'm going online. They're going to give, or to ChatGPT, and they're going to tell me. And they're going to give me more information. They're going to summarize it for me. What's that going to, now maybe I don't want to buy the newspaper anymore.
Well, that just comes with time. And you mentioned newspaper. I mean, that is a lost time, my friend. It's so nostalgic, and I do remember getting the paper, and I love the inserts. I love the comics. I love the sports section. I love the local section. Right? I miss it. I miss it. Where is it?
I miss it.
But, same thing with the phone book. Like, things are just changing, but now there's a progression of how things were from the 80s to the 90s, and all of a sudden tech hit, and we're creating. I mean, imagine, when you and I, back in the day, we didn't know I didn't have cell phone till that was in, I think it was in college where cell phones started to come out.
I remember the bag phones.
Jeez. And now look at that. Like, 5-year-olds are having fun. Everybody's carrying around a phone and an iPad, and 10 years from now, I don't think we'll have devices. I think everybody will just have an earpiece with a screen that pops up in your eye. It gives Meta glasses.
Apple figured out, but I had a client when I first started, and he was a typesetter.
A what?
Typesetter. Brandon, you know what a typesetter is?
Not off the top of my head. I've heard the name.
So it's when
something to do with printing, right?
Yeah. So when they used to create the newspaper, every page had to be set up with a little, like every article, each letter had to be put in, and they would take the letters and they would spell the words out.
Oh boy.
And then they would run it on a printing press.
Yeah.
Okay. Every page of the newspaper.
Yeah.
And he was a typesetter, and he belonged to the typesetters union. And while I was representing him, he told me, I said, what's going on? He goes, well, we just built, the Dayton Daily News just built this new building. We're going to be printing these papers down at this big new complex, and it's
down in.
And I said, you still typesetting? He goes, no, we don't do that anymore. He said, it's all done, through the computer, and I said, what do you do? He goes, I just press the button.
Oh man.
And I said, man, you need to get a new job. And they're no longer the typesetters union. So those guys are all gone, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we talk about transitioning, and we talk about responsibility, and not to change what we're talking about today, but staying with the theme of responsibility.
Yeah.
One of the things that what we do, and when clients come to us, and by the time we get the discovery and the body cam, we're meeting with our clients, and the initial intake, at least for me, is we get through some background information, and I said, hey, what was your interaction? What was your interaction with the police officer? Well, I didn't really say a whole lot, but then when you get the video, I mean, it was like
I didn't give him a statement.
I didn't tell him I was drinking. I didn't tell him where I was. I didn't tell him I was going. And then you get it, and it's like, wait a minute, you realized you've just made things worse for yourself.
Yep. So Tony, we get this a lot. People will say to us, hey, like, what do I need to do? Like, when I'm having that bad day and the police are at my door, or the police have pulled me over, or now all of a sudden they're on me. And so we know what they do. But if you were to give some advice, what responsibility, what would you tell them that they should and shouldn't do with that interaction with police?
Okay, so let's give me, and there's a lot of different scenarios. So give me a scenario like, are they in a vehicle getting pulled over? Are they knocking on the door? Do they have a search warrant? Give me a couple different ones, and let's kind of talk through some of that.
Okay, so let's say you get a phone call from a detective.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be the guy.
Okay.
Hey, Mr. Tony, I need to talk to you. Yeah. I got to tell you something that I just got a call from a detective, and he wants me to come down to the police station tomorrow morning, and he wants to talk to me. And I'd like to hire you. I like for you to come with me.
Okay.
There you go.
The first thing I would ask him, I said, what did you tell them? Because a lot of times we figure out that he's already talked to him on the telephone. Hopefully he hasn't gone down. But you mentioned this scenario that he hasn't. But hopefully on the telephone he hasn't gone down. He hopefully hasn't said anything to him. So the conversation hopefully is limited. And if it is, that's a good sign. A lot of time it isn't. And they'll say, because the first thing you want to know from a detective is, why are you calling me? What's this about? And then they'll say, well, this is, about whatever. An allegation that involves a robbery or a sexual allegation or an assault allegation.
You're writing bad checks.
You're writing bad checks, and he'll say, you know what? You're not in trouble. I just want to talk to you. I want to clear things up, right? So when somebody calls me and says, look, this really nice detective, he's calling me, he says he wants to clear things up, he wants me to come down. What do you think I should do? He seems really nice on the phone. These individuals, they're not in the business of, they have plenty of work to do. They don't have extra spare time to call people and ask them fair questions for no apparent reason. So at that point, what we tell them is that most likely you're a target, and you're a suspect, you're a target, and you're not a witness. Because a lot of times if law enforcement is reaching out to you in general as the public and they knock on your door, they say, we want to ask you a few questions. So we want to figure out very quickly, are you a suspect target of an investigation, or are you a witness? A lot of times, you're a suspect. So we say, do not call him back.
Don't talk to him.
Do not speak to him, because
But Tony,
every time you talk to him, it is not protected by Miranda.
But Tony, I want to fix it. I want to talk to him. I want to tell him that I didn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah. So, and that may be true. So if he says, "Hey, I'm representing, I'm investigating an assault charge," or whatever the case may be, of course you're not. Even on your worst day, you're not going to go sit down with law enforcement and hopefully admit anything that you've done. But what they do is they'll have a lot of information that indirectly puts pieces together that they didn't know about before.
Yeah.
So if they're investigating, some sort of sexual assault, and you're like, there's no way, I didn't do it, I wasn't there, so it's fine. But they may ask you questions. They may say, well, do you know this person? Yeah, I know this person. Have you texted this person before? Yes, of course I've texted him. It's on my phone. Well, do you mind I see your phone to make sure there's nothing inappropriate? Yeah, it's my phone. Then you get them access to your phone. Were you with this person last Tuesday, at Starbucks? Well, yeah, then you've given them a location of a date and time and a place that we don't know, and you don't know when this allegation has taken place or a period of time. So you're corroborating, and at that point, if you're corroborating those insignificant, in your mind, what is insignificant material, it just boosts that information to the detective. He's going to say, you know what, I'm feeling better about my case. That witness that came forward, I'm starting to believe this witness. The credibility goes from 20 to 80% now that you've corroborated a lot of stuff that she's already said, although mundane and not an admission of a crime or whatsoever. So that's why we say, you're not going to fix it.
But Tony,
you're not going to explain it. Just keep your mouth shut.
But Tony, if I don't, won't they think that I'm guilty?
They're going to think that anyway. It doesn't matter.
But if I tell them I want to go get a lawyer, won't they think I'm guilty?
They're not going to think they're guilty. They're going to get ticked off. They're going to say, darn it, that's one less information that I'm going to be able to have access to. I always tell clients this. I said, if you're innocent and you didn't do anything, you got one shot at this. If you're going to make a statement and you want to testify, you do it in court where there's a jury, where all the evidence is out, where the information is limited. It's limited to relevant information that's part of the court process. You're not going to go sit with a detective for 2 hours and allow him or her to ask you all these questions. And guess what? It's recorded. They're going to record it. They're going to ask you all this information. They're going to get your phone. They're going to get your DNA. They're going to play nice. They're going to say, this is for your benefit. And 2 hours later, they're going to say, hold on for a second. Let me go make a phone call. And the other officer comes in and he's got handcuffs. Like, we believe we have probable cause now because you've cooperated and corroborated a lot of the information that we have. So you're not going to fix your story. The best thing you could do is invoke your right to an attorney, invoke your right to remain silent. It's not whether you're innocent or not innocent. We've talked about this before. It's whether the state, whether the prosecution, whether law enforcement can create a case and prove the elements of the accusations beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yep.
And part of that investigation is they're trying to get you to elicit statements that corroborates what the complaining witness is saying happened, or whether, it was another type of writing bad checks or a theft offense or whatever investigation is going on. Your best bet is no matter if they believe, oh, you have a lawyer, you must have done something wrong. Well, that's garbage. Throw that away.
So you say keep your mouth shut.
Keep your mouth shut. You're not going to help yourself. No matter who you are, you're not going to talk yourself out of that.
And it doesn't make you look bad if you want to get a lawyer.
Absolutely not. In fact, most of the detectives who I've worked with understand the process. We'll call them and I'll say, so-and-so has just hired, and respectfully, we're not going to come in and we don't want to participate in any interview. Most of them understand that. They respect it. They understand the process. They appreciate it. They appreciate the contact, and they'll just note it in their file. And that's it. And they're just going to move on. Nobody's going to get upset about it.
That's what a lot of times people are their worst enemies, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The best thing you can do is clearly and very politely and very respectfully invoke your right to counsel.
Yeah.
And then get a lawyer immediately and have your lawyer reach out. A lot of times your lawyer can reach out. We get involved in cases early on and we can figure out, hey, what is my client a target suspect or is he a witness?
Yeah.
And if he is a suspect, then sometimes we'll try to gather enough information to be able to put some pieces together. And sometimes we do provide information, although limited. We don't provide our clients, but we provide information based upon what our clients have shared with us. And sometimes that helps law enforcement put their pieces together, and it downplays what they're investigating. And if they put their file together and they go present it to a prosecutor may look at it and say, well, this isn't enough.
Yeah.
But had you cooperated and provided statements and the detective believes in their case a little bit more and they go present it, then the prosecutor may take that case and say, well, this is a stronger case than what it was.
Yeah. I mean, I think everything you've said there is the best advice you can give to anybody. And so many people, again, they've never had contact with criminal justice system, never had to use a lawyer, and they get worried and they get scared. And if they would just listen to you and say, shut up, no talk.
That sounds like a great
shut up, no talk.
I'm going to make a T-shirt with that.
Yeah.
Legal chaos T-shirt.
That
Legal
actually
chaos T-shirt on the back, shut up, don't talk.
that actually comes from my old college roommate Jeff Tenery. The phone would ring, he'd say, shut up, no talk, stay away from the phone. So that's where that comes from, but it works here. I had we had a client once, and it was a father who called. He says, I need to speak with you. I need to see. I'm bringing my son to the office. And the son and this guy come down, and the son he's 18 years old. And I said, what's the problem? He said, the detective wants to talk to me. I said, well, what's the allegation? The allegation is that my son met a girl, and he assaulted her, sexually assaulted her. I said, okay. So I'm sitting there, I'm talking to this young man, and he says to me, here's what happened.
Okay.
These aren't the facts.
Sure.
But it was like this. I was out on a walk. I went through the park. I met a girl. She and I started to talk. We held hands. We sat on the bench, and we had a really nice. I gave each other a hug, and she went one way, and I went the other way.
That's it.
That was it. And so I called the detective, and I said, we are not going to speak. We're not going to give you a statement. And the father said, I don't get it. We just want to clear it up. And I said, let me explain to you. Here's what the girl's going to say. The girl's going to say that she went for a walk. She went to the park. She met a nice boy. They walked around. They held hands. They sat on the bench. And then he did something to her
Yes.
that is actionable and criminal.
Yeah.
And if we go and we tell the detective that, we've just confirmed 90% of her story.
Exactly.
That's why we don't do it. Interestingly, the detective said, Nick, I know you're not going to. Thanks.
Yeah.
He called me back and he said, without him, we have no evidence. So the case is dead. I thought it was over with. And then he called me back and he said, listen, I need to tell you something. That case I called you on, that young girl, the story is her father called me apologizing, didn't want to get her in trouble for filing a false police report.
Oh, boy.
The girl did go to a park, and she left and she went to a party, and she came home late, and she told her dad that the reason she was upset because she met somebody in the park,
Oh,
and she
man.
created a lie. But for the fact,
Oh, wow.
this guy is
like
going to
the
get
worst lie
charged.
ever.
Yeah, this guy's going to get charged. And so the point,
Yeah,
Tony, and
that's a good point, Nick.
Your advice is you need a criminal defense attorney, not just when you've done something wrong, but when you haven't done anything wrong, because the police aren't always there to get to the bottom of it. They're there to see if there's enough information for the case to go on to the prosecutor for charges.
Absolutely. And that's a great, first of all, that's a great example, and I'm glad that you shared that because, I don't want an audience to look at this thing and talk about such a serious type of allegation and downplay it, but you brought a prime example that false accusations happen. And the worst thing that you could do when you know you didn't do anything is to provide information that may lead a false investigation into charges. And
Yeah.
you just gave a good example of what happened in a situation where if he did go, and we know the story's false, that complaining witness would have kept on going with that story.
Yeah.
And that's scary stuff,
and,
man.
And that father,
Wow.
and that son, good people, and from their position, it's I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
I'm going to go and tell them I haven't
That's
done anything wrong, and
insane.
they'll listen to me.
That's insane.
But that's the way it is.
We get calls all the time, and the first thing that people say is, I've never had to hire a lawyer before. I don't know what to ask. I don't know what to look for. What do you suggest to the people in general? What do you suggest to these type of callers when, for the most part, they've never had to hire a criminal or traffic defense lawyer? They don't know what to say.
Yeah.
What do they look for? How do they find a lawyer? What do you suggest?
So, you and I think, and I hope that we're not the only ones that do it like this, but, we've always said to ourselves, to each other, to the people that work here, we're a service. We provide a service.
Yeah.
And we need to treat people that way.
Yep.
Sometimes we have bad experiences. We go to a doctor, we call around, we go to a plumber. Nobody wants to talk to you. For the advice I give is, you know what? You're going through, if you're calling a lawyer, you're having a hard time. You've got a bad thing that's happening in your life. Unless you've won the lottery, there's a bad thing. You either you're going through a divorce, maybe getting charged with a crime, maybe you got pulled over, maybe you had a bad day. What do you do? Well, what you should do is you need to do your homework. You need to do your research, because it's like anything else. If you've got a medical issue, if you need to see a specialist, you do your homework. A good lawyer is going to provide the same type of service. And you need to be able to do your research, and then you make your phone call, and then you talk to them. And hopefully they will provide you with the courtesy to hear you out, to ask specific questions, to help explain to you what you're facing, a little bit about the legal situation, and you need to feel comfortable with that person. You need to know that they care about you. You need to ask them questions. What kind of experience do you have in these types of cases? Are you familiar with this court? Are you familiar with this material?
Let me interrupt for a second. You just said, are you familiar with this court? How do you feel in the internet these days? I mean, you could be in Zimbabwe and have an office in New York City and say you practice in New York City.
Yeah.
Right? How do you feel about that? Because right now that there's a huge trend. There's this national law firm, Morgan & Morgan, and they're all over the country. And we talked about that the other day. But in our field, there's lawyers and law firms that create websites and little, I wouldn't even say satellite offices. I don't even know if they appear here, but they're saying, hey, we practice in this court, and that's dangerous, right? I mean, how do you feel about that?
It's disingenuous. It's like me saying, hey, I practice in Chicago, Illinois, and I'll handle your case. Well, I might, but I don't do it regularly, and I'm going to tell you that. If you call me, hey, Nick, I think you're a really good lawyer. Have you ever handled a case in Chicago, and will you handle a case in Chicago for me? The first thing that I'm going to say to them is, look, I don't practice there.
Yeah.
Under certain circumstances, let's talk about it. But if I don't tell them that, or if someone is calling a lawyer and thinks that they practice law in that jurisdiction, that's disingenuous. And those you need to run away from.
So you're advising that if you're calling somebody, and what I think you're saying is make sure they practice in that area. But in order to confirm that, say, hey, where's your office?
Look,
let me come down. Let me come down to your office. You want my money? Okay. Where's your office at? And you'll see it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
If you're walking in to a building when there's an office share and you're going way down the hallway and the office is room 662, and you go in there and you're knocking on the door and nobody's answering, it's a little closet, run away.
Sure.
Run away.
Look, that doesn't mean that someone's not a good lawyer.
No, I'm not saying
but
that.
What I think it raises is a question about sincerity and being genuine and being transparent. I think that lawyers, if the good lawyers can go anywhere and do a good job.
Of course.
But if I'm going to hold myself out as being a regular practitioner in a certain court, then I'm being disingenuous.
Sure.
It's almost what we would call a half-truth, which I think is even worse than a lie, because there's a little bit of truth sprinkled into it. But yeah, so you're right. You need to know, do they practice in that area? Here's what makes me feel good when people call. People will say, thank you so much for spending some time with me.
Yeah.
I just called somebody. I said, hey, I've got this legal issue. And they said, well, it's going to cost X amount of dollars. You want to hire me or not?
Yeah. I love hearing that. Thanks for, the kind words of thanks for your time. That to me was fine. And I talked to a couple individuals today. They didn't want to retain our services, and I gave them some really good advice. And I said, well, I really appreciate your time. Mm-hmm. I think they did. I was sincere. I think that's the right way of doing it. Well, Nick, it's about that time.
Yeah.
Guess what time is it?
Is it closing argument?
It's closing argument time.
Brandon said he came up with a great idea. He said after the last podcast, we ought to have like an opening statement, maybe a closing statement.
Yeah, we missed the boat on the opening statement.
didn't.
I think we just ran right into that NBA scandal.
I did. Yeah, I know. But I had to talk about it. Okay, you want to give a closing? You want me to give a closing, or you want both to close? Both closing.
Well, I think in every case, right, the plaintiff has a closing argument, the defendant gets a closing argument, the judge Brandon over here will make the decision here. I'm gonna put you on the spot, Brandon. You decide which side you're on. How about that?
All right, that's right.
How about that for
All right.
improvising?
Okay, so you're going to take. We're doing a closing argument on the Uber case because you're going to take the easy side. Go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're here today because somebody decided to bring a claim against a driver that drives his own vehicle, a driver that parks his vehicle in his own house, a driver that pays his own taxes, a driver that's trying to make a living, and he uses the Uber brand to connect to the passenger. He doesn't get paid by Uber as a W-2. He gets connected and he gets a tip and he gets a payment from the passenger who has to pay Uber, and Uber takes a percentage of it and he gives it to my client. Okay? My client here, Uber, does not employ these drivers. They're independent contractors, and in no way are they responsible for the intentional act of these drivers. The only way you get to that is if you make the second part analysis, if you decide that they're considered employees. If we're going to do this, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's going to open up the floodgates. We may never see Uber the way it is ever again. You may never see DoorDash the way it is ever again. If we're considering creating employees, then what I submit you have to find is that the Uber has to have a brick and mortar spot, and these individuals go in and they take their time card and they punch in every day 8 to 5. Well, that's not the case. Uber, we're not telling our drivers when to drive. We're not telling our drivers what kind of car to drive. We're not telling them where to park their car. In fact, we're telling them to keep their own insurance. I submit to you that Uber drivers are not employees of Uber, but they will and always be independent contractor. I rest my case.
Wow, that was pretty good, Tony. But as Paul Harvey used to say, this is the rest of the story. And we've had an opportunity to meet Gounaris, the 95-year-old, who she needed to get from her assisted living over to the grocery store. And so she went on the line. Not online, Brandon. She went on the line. And she said, how do I go? I need a ride. And she saw this great shiny app called Uber. And she called her grandson and she said, I can't look. How do I get the Uber? Mom, download the app. It says Uber. You're going to work with Uber. So she downloads the app and she puts her credit card information in there. And she says, I need to get to the grocery store. I need to buy baklava. And I need to get some walnuts and some honey and some sugar. And Yaya pushes the Uber app and she goes outside with her walker. And all of a sudden, this nice black sedan pulls up and it says, Uber. There's a light right in the front windshield. It says Uber. And she says, my Uber is here. Yaya does not know that this dude is not working for Uber. It says Uber. She's getting in the Uber car. And she's driving, and Mr. Uber driver takes all of her money. And there's no baklava for the grandkids. And Yaya says, what do I know about independent contractors or contractors? The Uber, the app he stole from me. And how I got hurt, and they pushed me, and they took my money, and there's no baklava, and Greek Easter is done. It's ruined. You got to find this guy guilty. Uber's got to be found guilty. There was no Greek Easter. There was no baklava. There were no red eggs, and it's all because of Uber. You got to find him responsible. For independent contractor. What is that? We don't understand that. Find him guilty. No more. Done. That's it. So we got a lot of fun. I think what is
Hold on.
Oh, we're gonna get a decision. Who are you rooting for?
Well, I think Nick brought up a good point, which is, the grandmother in his scenario, she doesn't distinguish whether or not they are independent contractors or not. In fact, she calls him the Uber driver. That's they didn't say, oh, that's Jeremy who subcontracts through Uber. And if he has a light in his car that says Uber, and he has, his paychecks come from Uber, I would call that an employee.
He doesn't get a paycheck. We've
Listen, you've
that.
had your closing argument. We've got the judge that's making his decision here.
Oh, you're making an emotional decision over there. You got stuck with the grandma.
Yeah.
Hey, how about a 25-year-old bodybuilder? Would that made a difference? You got stuck. You felt you drank the juice there, Brandon. Get out of here.
You know what? Thank you, Brandon.
Get out of here. You drank the
court.
juice. You drank the juice.
Tony, that was great. I love it. We started this with talking about responsibility. We talk about personal responsibility. We talk about corporate responsibility. We talked about a lot of the cases that are going on.
Sure.
And ultimately, like we said, that's what the law is about. It's about who's responsible. And so it was fun talking about these cases, talking about these issues. I can't wait to see what happens.
You know what, Nick, and just final thought, and we started this podcast, I don't, and now that we're doing it more, I know sometimes we get stuck in kind of the area we practice, but this is chaotic. I mean, it is, a lot of the stuff here just doesn't make any sense, and it's chaotic, and that fact that we got technology in the mix of it, it's insane, it's exciting, and I don't even understand it sometimes.
Me neither.
I don't even understand it sometimes.
I'm glad you're here to not understand it with me.
I love debating about it. I love talking about it, and hopefully, audience provides some questioning, some feedback, and let us know what they want us to talk about.
Yeah, and so we have, by the way, before we go, real quick, we've gotten a lot of questions. We're going to get to some questions that have come in. Go to our different social media accounts. Go here, subscribe to this channel.
Make a comment, DM
Make
us.
a comment.
We'll try to get to as many as we can. We'll start doing that here shortly.
Yeah, we want to provide information that you guys are interested in. So thanks very much. That's a wrap on episode 4 of Legal Chaos.
Wow. To be continued.